I'm Maureen, 62 years old, and I thought I knew what family meant until the day my own daughter asked me to sleep in a dusty attic while her in-laws took the guest rooms. I'd sold my little house and moved in with Sarah after my husband passed, believing blood runs thicker than water. I contributed $800 monthly from my Social Security, cooked every meal, and cleaned every corner of their home. But sometimes life has a way of showing you exactly where you stand, and sometimes the most unexpected moments reveal who people really are. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter, about money, and about my own worth. Before I share what happened, let me know where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to hear how a dusty attic became the beginning of my freedom and how winning the lottery revealed more about my family than I ever wanted to know. Moving in with Sarah seemed like the perfect solution after Harold's funeral 3 years ago. The ovarian cyst surgery had drained my savings, and the little ranch house in the suburbs felt too big and too quiet, without my husband's laughter echoing through the rooms. Sarah had always been my baby, my only child, and when she suggested I come live with her and Brandon in their 4-bedroom colonial in upstate New York, it felt like a blessing. Those first few months were an adjustment period, naturally. Sarah worked as a marketing coordinator for a local advertising firm, while Brandon managed regional sales for an electronics company. They both left early and returned late, which gave me plenty of time to settle into a routine. I'd wake at 6, make coffee, and prepare breakfast for everyone. The smell of bacon and fresh pancakes usually brought them downstairs, with sleepy smiles and grateful hugs. I took pride in maintaining their beautiful home. The hardwood floors gleamed after my careful mopping. The granite countertops sparkled, and every piece of laundry was folded and put away before they returned from work. My $800 monthly contribution helped with utilities and groceries, though I never expected any fanfare about it. Family helps family, that's what Harold always taught me. But somewhere between the wedding photos on the mantel and the perfectly coordinated throw pillows, I began to notice subtle changes. Sarah's conversations grew shorter, more focused on logistics than connection. "Mum, did you pick up my dry cleaning?" Replaced "Mum, how was your day?" Brandon remained polite, always thanking me for meals. But our interactions felt scripted, like he was following some invisible manual on how to treat your mother-in-law. During dinner, they'd discuss work projects, weekend plans with friends, or home improvement ideas. I'd listen occasionally, offering thoughts or asking questions, but increasingly found myself feeling like a spectator in their lives rather than a participant. When I'd share stories about my day, volunteering at the library, or chatting with Mrs. Henderson next door, their responses became polite nods and, "That's nice, Mum," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to their world. The guest room I occupied was lovely, decorated in soft blues and whites, with a comfortable queen bed and an antique dresser that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. I kept my belongings organized and minimal, not wanting to impose on their space more than necessary. Most evenings I'd retire early with a book, listening to the murmur of their television or quiet conversations from downstairs. I convinced myself this was normal, this feeling of being slightly out of place. They were young, busy, building their lives together. Of course they wouldn't want to spend every evening entertaining an old widow. I was grateful for their generosity, their willingness to take me in when I needed it most. I told myself that feeling like an outsider was just my imagination, that the growing distance was simply the natural evolution of adult relationships. But deep down, in those quiet moments before sleep, I wondered if Harold would recognize the daughter we'd raised. The Sarah who used to call every Sunday just to hear my voice, who'd drive 3 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu, who used to say I was her best friend. That Sarah seemed to be fading, replaced by someone who saw me as a responsibility rather than a mother, a household helper rather than family. On a crisp Monday morning in March, Sarah approached me in the kitchen while I was washing breakfast dishes. Her expression carried that particular tension I'd learned to recognize the look she wore when she had something important to discuss, but didn't quite know how to begin. "Mum, I have some news," she said, leaning against the counter with her coffee mug. "Brandon's parents are coming to visit this weekend, and his sister Jessica is bringing her family too." I dried my hands on the dish towel, turning to face her with a smile. How wonderful, I'd love to meet them properly. When do they arrive? Friday afternoon, and they'll stay through Monday morning. Harold and Margaret are retiring next month, so this is kind of a celebration trip. And Jessica's kids, Emma and Lucas, they're 8 and 5, so they'll probably be pretty energetic. The excitement in her voice was infectious, and I immediately began planning in my head. "I'll make that lasagna you love, and maybe my apple pie for dessert. How many will there be total?" 6 additional people. Harold, Margaret, Jessica, Kevin, and the 2 kids. Sarah paused, fidgeting with her mug handle. "Mum, I really want everything to be perfect. Brandon's family, they're pretty particular about things, and I want to make sure they feel completely comfortable." I understood completely. Meeting the in-laws, especially for an extended stay, carried enormous pressure. "Of course, honey. I'll help however I can. Should I make up the guest room for Harold and Margaret?" "Actually, I've been thinking about sleeping arrangements," Sarah said, and something in her tone made me pause. "Harold and Margaret will take the master guest room since they're older and need the attached bathroom. Jessica and Kevin will use the smaller guest room, and the kids can use the pull-out sofa in the den." I nodded, mentally calculating space and logistics. "That sounds perfect. I can move my things temporarily. Maybe I could use your office. I don't mind sleeping on the daybed for a few nights." Sarah's hesitation lasted just a moment too long. "Well, actually, Brandon needs the office for some work calls he has to make over the weekend. Important client meetings, you know." "Of course," I said, though confusion was beginning to creep in. "Well, what did you have in mind?" "The attic has that old bedroom set up from when the previous owner's teenage son lived up there. It's not fancy, but there's a bed and everything. It would just be for 4 nights, Mum, just until they leave on Monday." The words hit me like cold water. The attic. I'd been up there exactly once when we'd stored some of Harold's boxes after I moved in. It was dusty, poorly lit, and smelled of old wood and neglect. The narrow stairs creaked ominously, and the single small window barely provided enough light during the day. "The attic," I repeated, hoping I'd misunderstood. "I know it's not ideal, but it's temporary. And honestly, you're such a light sleeper, you'll probably rest better away from all the noise the kids will make." Sarah's voice carried forced cheerfulness, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I stood there, dish towel still in my hands, processing what my daughter had just asked of me. In my own mind, I ran through alternatives. Surely there had to be another solution. But as I looked at Sarah's expectant face, as I saw the stress lines around her eyes, and the way she held her shoulders, I realized this wasn't really a request. "Okay," I heard myself saying, "if that's what works best for everyone." The relief on Sarah's face was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh, thank you, Mum. I knew you'd understand. It's just for a few days, and then everything will go back to normal. You're the best." She kissed my cheek and practically bounded out of the kitchen, already pulling out her phone to confirm arrangements with Brandon's family. I remained by the sink, still holding that dish towel, wondering what had just happened and why my chest felt so tight. That evening, I climbed the narrow attic stairs for the second time in my life. The room was exactly as I remembered. Small, sloped ceilings, one tiny window, and furnishings that belonged in a college dormitory rather than a home. The mattress sagged in the middle. The blanket smelled musty, and when I turned on the overhead bulb, It cast harsh shadows that made everything look even more depressing. I made the bed with fresh sheets from the linen closet, arranged my few belongings on the rickety dresser, and tried to tell myself this was temporary, just a small sacrifice to help my daughter make a good impression. But as I lay down that first night listening to Sarah and Brandon laughing together downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Friday evening brought the arrival of Brandon's family in a flurry of luggage, excited voices, and carefully orchestrated introductions. Harold Patterson was a distinguished-looking man of 68, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to. Margaret, 65, carried herself with the refined elegance of a retired high school principal, which she was. Both had the kind of understated confidence that comes from decades of comfortable middle-class living. Jessica arrived separately with her family driving a pristine SUV that probably cost more than I'd spent on cars in my entire lifetime. At 35, she carried herself with the sharp efficiency of someone who sold pharmaceuticals to busy doctors, which was exactly her profession. Her husband Kevin, a soft-spoken IT consultant, seemed perpetually attached to his laptop, even during family gatherings. Their children, Emma and Lucas, burst into the house like small tornadoes, immediately claiming territory and establishing their presence with the confidence of kids who were used to being welcome everywhere they went. Emma, 8 years old, had her mother's assertiveness and her grandmother's critical eye. 5-year-old Lucas possessed the kind of boundless energy that could exhaust adults within minutes. I joined the family gathering in the living room wearing my nicest dress and my most genuine smile, hoping to make a positive first impression. Sarah performed introductions with the nervous enthusiasm of a hostess determined to orchestrate perfection. "Everyone, this is my mother Maureen," she announced. "Mum, you remember Brandon's parents, Harold and Margaret? And this is his sister Jessica, her husband Kevin, and their kids Emma and Lucas." Harold shook my hand with the firm grip of someone making a professional assessment. "Nice to see you again, Maureen. Sarah's told us so much about you." Margaret's smile was polite, but distant. The expression of someone being gracious because social conventions required it. "How lovely that Sarah has you here to help with everything." Help with everything. The phrase struck me oddly, as if my primary function in the household was service rather than family membership. But I pushed the thought away, determined to focus on making everyone comfortable. Jessica barely looked up from organizing her children's scattered belongings. "Kids, say hello to Grandma Sarah's mum," she instructed, though neither child seemed particularly interested in following directions. Dinner that first night was an elaborate affair. Sarah had prepared Brandon's family's favorite meal beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables and twice-baked potatoes. I'd spent the afternoon helping with preparations, chopping vegetables, and setting the table with the good china we'd never used before. The conversation flowed around topics I couldn't quite enter: Harold's retirement plans, Margaret's garden club activities, Jessica's latest sales achievements, Kevin's promotion prospects. When I attempted to contribute a story about my volunteer work at the local literacy centre, the response was polite but brief before the discussion moved on to more familiar territory. "Sarah, dear, this house is absolutely lovely," Margaret said, surveying the dining room with an appraising eye. "You've decorated it beautifully. Brandon is so lucky to have someone with such wonderful taste." I watched my daughter glow under the praise, and my heart swelled with pride for her. But I also noticed that no one acknowledged the fresh flowers I'd arranged, or the extra attention I'd paid to cleaning every surface until it gleamed. After dinner, I automatically began clearing plates, assuming this was my contribution to the evening's success. But as I moved between the kitchen and dining room, I noticed that conversations paused when I approached and resumed when I left, as if my presence interrupted rather than enhanced the family dynamic. That first night in the attic was an exercise in adjustment. The mattress springs creaked with every movement, the single blanket proved inadequate against the March chill, and the sounds of family conversation drifted up from below like echoes from a party I wasn't invited to attend. I lay awake listening to laughter, the murmur of intimate family discussions, and the comfortable sounds of people who belonged together. The weekend developed a rhythm that gradually excluded me from meaningful participation. Breakfast became a casual affair where I cooked and served while others planned their day. Harold and Margaret held court at the kitchen table, sharing stories about Brandon's childhood and dispensing gentle advice about home improvements and career strategies. Margaret's praise for Sarah was constant and effusive. "You've made such a lovely home here. And your cooking, dear, it's restaurant quality. Brandon really found a treasure." I smiled and nodded from my position at the stove, flipping pancakes and refilling coffee cups, feeling more like hired help than family. When Margaret asked about my contributions to the household, the question was phrased in a way that made me feel defensive. "It must be such a comfort to have somewhere to stay," she said with kind condescension. "Not every family is generous enough to take in aging parents." Aging parents. The phrase stung more than I expected. I wasn't an aging parent being taken in out of charity. I was a contributing member of this household, a mother who'd raised a successful daughter, and a woman who'd managed her own home for 40 years. But in Margaret's eyes, I was apparently something closer to a charity case. Jessica's interactions with me were perfunctory at best. She treated me with the distant politeness usually reserved for service staff, acknowledging my presence when necessary, but never engaging in genuine conversation. When her children made messes, which happened frequently, she simply stepped over them, apparently confident that someone else would handle cleanup duties. Kevin, to his credit, seemed genuinely kind, but he was so absorbed in his work and his devices that our interactions remained minimal. He thanked me for meals and made pleasant comments about the weather, but never ventured into personal territory. The children, Emma and Lucas, treated the house like their personal playground. They left toys scattered through every room, demanded constant snacks and entertainment, and approached each day with the assumption that adults existed primarily to serve their needs. When I gently suggested they help clean up after themselves, Emma looked at me with the withering expression of someone far too important for such menial tasks. "Mummy says we're guests," she announced with 8-year-old authority. "Guests don't have to clean." By Sunday evening, I felt emotionally exhausted from maintaining my pleasant demeanor while feeling increasingly invisible and unimportant. The family dynamics had established themselves clearly. Harold and Margaret were honored elders whose comfort took priority. Jessica and Kevin were successful adults whose careers and opinions mattered. The children were precious beings to be indulged, and I was the helpful background figure who kept everything running smoothly. Sunday night, as I climbed the attic stairs for the 4th time, carrying my small bag of personal items and trying not to feel sorry for myself, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. "Mum really outdid herself this weekend," Brandon was saying to someone, probably Sarah. "I'm so glad your parents approve of everything," Sarah replied. "I was worried about making a good impression. They're very impressed. Mum mentioned how organized you are, how well you manage everything. Dad said you're clearly the kind of woman who knows how to run a proper household." There was a pause, and then Sarah's voice lower now. "I just hope Mum wasn't too much trouble. I know she means well, but sometimes she can be a little overwhelming with guests." Too much trouble. Overwhelming. I stood on those narrow attic stairs, hand gripping the railing, processing words that felt like physical blows. I'd spent 4 days cooking, cleaning, and trying to stay out of everyone's way, and somehow I was still too much trouble. That night, lying on that sagging mattress under that thin blanket, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not from self-pity exactly, but from the dawning realization that my daughter saw me as a burden rather than a mother, an obligation rather than family. The tears weren't just about the attic. They were about recognizing that the child I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had somehow learned to see me as disposable. Monday morning brought the choreographed departure of Brandon's family. Luggage appeared in the front hallway, thank yous were exchanged, and promises to stay in touch filled the air with polite insincerity. Harold shook Brandon's hand with paternal approval. Margaret hugged Sarah with genuine warmth, and Jessica gathered her children with the efficient authority of someone accustomed to managing logistics. "This was wonderful," Margaret declared, surveying the house one final time. "You two have built such a lovely life together. We're so proud of Brandon for finding someone so capable." I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the farewell ceremony with mixed emotions. Relief predominated, certainly, but underneath lurked something more complex. The realization that I'd been successfully invisible throughout the entire weekend. No one thanked me for the meals I'd cooked, the dishes I'd washed, or the general maintenance that had kept everything running smoothly. After the cars pulled away and the house settled into quiet normalcy, Sarah immediately turned to me with bright expectation. "Mum, you can move back to your regular room now. I'll help you carry your things downstairs." Her tone suggested that the weekend's arrangement had been a minor inconvenience, easily forgotten now that normal life could resume. There was no acknowledgement of what she'd asked me to do. No recognition that sleeping in an attic while paying $800 monthly rent might have felt degrading. "Thank you," I said simply, though the words felt hollow. We moved my belongings back to the guest room in silence. Sarah chattered about how well the weekend had gone, how impressed Brandon's parents were with the house, how Jessica had complimented her cooking. The conversation was entirely focused on her success as a hostess, with no reference to my participation or sacrifice. "I think that went perfectly," she concluded, smoothing the bedspread in my regular room. "Brandon's so happy that his family approves of everything. It means a lot to him, you know." I nodded and smiled, playing my expected role as the understanding mother who was happy to help however needed. But inside, something had shifted permanently. The weekend had revealed something about our relationship that I couldn't unsee. My daughter was willing to treat me as less a family when it served her purposes. Tuesday morning, I decided to venture out for grocery shopping, partially to replenish supplies after the weekend's entertaining, and partially to have some time alone to process my emotions. The drive to Kroger was therapeutic, the first time in days I'd been completely by myself. The grocery store was pleasantly uncrowded on a Tuesday morning. I moved through the aisles methodically, selecting fresh produce and planning meals for the week ahead. At the checkout counter, Eddie, the friendly clerk who'd been working there for years, greeted me with his usual warm smile. "How are you today, Mrs. Patterson? You're looking well." "I'm fine." "Thank you, Eddie. How's your granddaughter doing with her college applications?" We chatted briefly about his family while he rang up my purchases. As he bagged the last items, my eye caught the lottery display near the register. The Powerball jackpot sign read $347 million, a number so large it seemed almost fictional. "Big jackpot this week," Eddie commented, following my gaze. On impulse, I reached for my wallet. "I'll take one Powerball ticket." "Feeling lucky today?" he asked with a grin, processing the additional transaction. "Maybe I am," I replied, though I couldn't quite explain what had prompted the purchase. I'd never been much of a gambler, and Harold had always considered lottery tickets a waste of money. Eddie handed me the small slip of paper with numbers that meant nothing. 723 and 3145, 52, and Powerball 18. I chose them based on family birthdays. Sarah's birthday, Harold's birthday, and my own, plus random selections for the remaining numbers. Good luck, Mrs. Patterson, Eddie said as I tucked the ticket into my purse. Maybe this one's your ticket to freedom. Freedom? The word resonated strangely as I drove home, carrying groceries and a lottery ticket that cost $2 and represented possibilities I'd never seriously considered. The rest of Tuesday and Wednesday passed in routine normalcy. I cooked, cleaned, and maintained the household rhythm that had been disrupted by the weekend's visitors. Sarah returned to her work schedule, and Brandon resumed his usual pattern of polite but distant interaction. Neither mentioned the weekend's sleeping arrangements or acknowledged what they'd asked of me. Wednesday evening, while preparing dinner, I listened to Sarah describe her day at work. She was animated discussing a new marketing campaign and the positive feedback she'd received from her supervisor. Her enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, reminding me of the ambitious young woman I'd raised. "I think I might be in line for a promotion," she said, tossing salad while I stirred pasta sauce. "Jennifer mentioned that they're creating a new senior coordinator position, and I have more experience than anyone else on the team." "That's wonderful, honey," I said. And I meant it. Despite everything, I wanted Sarah to succeed and thrive. My complicated feelings about our relationship didn't diminish my pride in her accomplishments. Brandon thinks I should ask for a significant salary increase if they offer me the position. We've been talking about updating the kitchen, maybe redoing the master bathroom too. Home improvement plans that I noticed didn't include any consideration of my comfort or preferences. But I pushed the observation aside, focusing instead on being supportive. Thursday brought more routine laundry cleaning, meal preparation, and the familiar rhythm of maintaining someone else's household. I moved through the day mechanically, my mind occupied with thoughts I couldn't quite organize. The weekend had awakened something in me, a recognition that I'd been accepting less than I deserved, but I wasn't sure what to do with that awareness. Friday evening, while cleaning out my purse to organize receipts and coupons, I rediscovered the lottery ticket I'd bought on Tuesday. It had been completely forgotten, buried beneath tissues and gum wrappers, and the accumulated detritus of daily life. The evening news was playing in the background, a familiar soundtrack of weather updates and local happenings. I was half listening while sorting through my purse contents when the anchor's voice caught my attention. "Tonight's Powerball drawing has produced a single winning ticket sold here in our state. The jackpot amount is $347 million, with winning numbers 7, 23, 31, 45, 52, and Powerball 18. I froze, lottery ticket in hand, as the numbers registered. 7 Sarah's birthday, 23 Harold's birthday, 31 my birthday, 45, 52, 18. The random numbers I'd selected without much thought. My hands began shaking as I checked the ticket against the numbers being repeated on screen. 7, 23, 31, 45, 52, Powerball 18. Every single number matched perfectly. I stared at that small piece of paper, reading and rereading the numbers until they blurred together. $347 million. The amount was so large it felt abstract, like play money or a mathematical error. But the numbers were undeniable, printed clearly on the ticket I held in my trembling hands. My first instinct was to run downstairs and share the news immediately. Sarah and Brandon were watching television in the living room, probably planning their evening or discussing weekend plans. They should know about this incredible turn of events. We were family, after all. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of sleeping in that dusty attic while paying rent for a house where I was treated like help. Maybe it was the realization that for 4 days I'd been invisible to people who were supposed to love me. Or maybe it was simply the need to process this information privately before sharing it with anyone else. I sat on the edge of my bed, lottery ticket in my hands, and thought about what this meant. Financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined. the ability to live independently, travel, make choices based on preference rather than necessity. But more than that, it represented something I'd lost sight of over the past year: the power to determine my own worth and demand respect. The ticket went into my jewelry box, nestled next to Harold's wedding ring and my grandmother's pearl earrings. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand what this meant for my future and my relationship with Sarah. For the first time in months, I felt like I held something more valuable than money. I held choices. The first week after discovering my lottery win passed in a strange state of suspension. I moved through daily routines with the same efficiency as always. But underneath the familiar activities, my mind raced with possibilities and plans. The ticket remained hidden in my jewelry box, a secret that gave me a peculiar sense of power and anticipation. I spent considerable time researching the lottery claim process on the computer in Brandon's office. $347 million paid as an annuity over 30 years, or a lump sum of approximately $210 million after federal taxes. Either amount represented more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, but the lump sum would provide immediate access to funds for whatever changes I wanted to make. More importantly, I learned that I had 365 days to claim the prize, a full year to decide when and how to proceed. This knowledge gave me breathing room to observe, to test, to understand exactly where I stood in my daughter's life before making any irreversible decisions. During that first week, I conducted small experiments. On Wednesday, I suggested we go out for dinner at Red Lobster, a restaurant I'd always enjoyed, but that Sarah considered expensive for casual dining. "Mum, that's pretty pricey for a Wednesday night," she said, not looking up from her laptop where she was reviewing work documents. "We have leftover lasagna in the fridge." "I'd like to treat us," I offered. "My social security check came in, and I thought it might be nice to celebrate your potential promotion." Sarah's expression shifted slightly. "Well, if you're paying, I suppose that would be okay, but nothing too extravagant." At dinner, Sarah spent most of the meal responding to work emails on her phone, offering distracted comments about the food and minimal engagement with actual conversation. When I tried to discuss current events or share thoughts about a book I'd been reading, her responses were polite but brief. I was paying for the meal, but I still felt like an obligation rather than chosen company. The second week brought deeper observations about our household dynamics. I began paying attention to the division of labor, the financial contributions, and the emotional investments in our shared living situation. The results were sobering. I handled approximately 80% of the housework, all cooking, most cleaning, all laundry, grocery shopping, and general maintenance. My $800 monthly contribution covered nearly half the household expenses when utilities, food, and incidentals were calculated. Yet I was consistently treated as a guest, whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Sarah's conversations with friends, which I sometimes overheard, painted a picture of generous daughter heroically taking in her aging mother. "It's challenging sometimes," she'd say during phone calls, "but family takes care of family, you know." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was subsidizing my own marginalization. On Friday of the second week, Margaret called to invite Sarah and Brandon to Easter dinner. I listened from the kitchen while Sarah accepted enthusiastically discussing menu plans and timing with her mother-in-law. No mention was made of including me in the invitation, and Sarah didn't ask whether I'd be welcome or suggest that I might want to attend. "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said. "We're so looking forward to it. Should we bring anything special?" After she hung up, I waited for her to mention the conversation to discuss Easter plans that might affect our household. But the call was never referenced, leaving me to wonder if I was expected to spend the holiday alone, or if Sarah simply hadn't considered my existence when making family plans. That Friday evening, I made an appointment with James Wilson, an estate planning attorney whose office was located 30 minutes away. I told Sarah I was meeting a friend for lunch on Monday, a small deception that felt necessary for maintaining privacy while I explored my options. Monday morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit and drove to James Wilson's law office. He was a kind man in his 50s who specialized in estate planning, tax law, and financial management for retirees. I'd chosen him specifically because his website emphasized discretion and experience with sudden wealth situations. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, reviewing the lottery ticket I'd brought for verification, "this is certainly an unusual situation. You're absolutely certain these numbers match the drawing?" "I've checked dozens of times," I assured him. "I'm not imagining this." He made several phone calls to confirm the ticket's validity and the claiming procedures. "You have several options for proceeding. The Lottery Commission requires public identification of winners, but you can limit media exposure if you prefer. We can also establish trusts and financial structures to manage the funds responsibly." We spent 2 hours discussing the practical and legal aspects of claiming such a significant prize. Wilson recommended claiming the lump sum for maximum flexibility and establishing a revocable trust to manage the funds. He also suggested waiting another week or two before claiming to allow for complete financial planning and legal preparation. "Mrs. Patterson," he said as our meeting concluded, "may I ask what prompted you to wait 2 weeks before seeking advice?" Most people would have claimed immediately. I considered my answer carefully. I wanted to observe some family dynamics before making any major changes. This money will affect relationships, and I wanted to understand what those relationships actually were before everything changed. Wilson nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd seen sudden wealth transform families in unexpected ways. Very wise. Money has a way of revealing people's true motivations. Driving home from that appointment, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The wheels were in motion, but I still had time to observe and plan. Most importantly, I had time to see how Sarah treated me when she believed I had nothing to offer beyond domestic service and modest financial contributions. The answer to that question was becoming increasingly clear with each passing day. Monday evening, I returned home from my meeting with the lawyer to find Sarah and Brandon discussing weekend plans over dinner. Their conversation was animated and optimistic, filled with references to people I'd never met, and activities that clearly didn't include me. "Jessica called this afternoon," Sarah was saying as I joined them at the table. "She wants to plan a family vacation this summer, maybe rent a house in the Hamptons for a week." "That sounds expensive," Brandon replied, though his tone suggested interest rather than dismissal. "She thinks we could split it 4 ways, her family, Harold and Margaret, us, and maybe Brandon's cousin David's family. It would actually be pretty reasonable if we all contributed." I ate my reheated plate of pasta salad and listened to them calculate costs and logistics for a vacation that apparently didn't include the third adult currently living in their house and contributing to their monthly expenses. When I gently asked about the plans, Sarah's response was vaguely dismissive. "Oh, Mum, it's just some preliminary ideas. Nothing's definite yet." But the way she and Brandon continued planning, discussing bedroom assignments and shared meals and activity costs, made it clear that my participation had never been considered. I was family enough to cook their meals and clean their house, but not family enough to vacation with them. Tuesday brought an unexpected test of our relationship dynamics. Sarah came home from work in an unusually foul mood, slamming her purse onto the counter and sighing dramatically while she opened mail. "Rough day?" I asked, genuinely concerned about her well-being. "The promotion fell through," she said bitterly. "Jennifer decided to bring in someone from outside the company instead of promoting internally. 3 years of excellent performance reviews, and they give it to some stranger with fancy credentials." My heart went out to her immediately. Sarah had worked hard for that position, and the disappointment was clearly devastating. I'm so sorry, honey. That must be incredibly frustrating. It's not just frustrating, it's insulting, she continued, beginning to warm up with righteous indignation. I've given that company everything, worked late countless times, covered for other people's mistakes. And this is how they repay loyalty. I made her favorite comfort food for dinner, mac and cheese with breadcrumb topping, garlic bread, and chocolate cake for dessert. We talked about her work situation, her feelings of betrayal, and her concerns about career advancement. For 2 hours, our conversation felt like old times, like the relationship we'd had before marriage, and mortgages and in-laws complicated everything. Thanks, Mum, she said as I cleared the dinner dishes. I really needed this tonight. It's nice to have someone who understands. I felt a surge of hope that maybe the weekend's dynamics had been an aberration, that underneath everything we still had the loving relationship I remembered. But the feeling was short-lived. Wednesday morning, Sarah's mood had shifted again. The previous night's gratitude was replaced by her usual distracted efficiency, and our conversation returned to logistics and obligations rather than emotional connection. When I mentioned that I'd enjoyed our talk the night before, her response was polite but distant. Thanks for listening, Mum. I was pretty upset. No acknowledgement that I'd rearranged my evening to provide comfort, that I'd cooked her favorite meal or offered emotional support. Yesterday's vulnerability had been compartmentalized and filed away, leaving our relationship exactly where it had been before her work disappointment. Thursday afternoon, while folding laundry in the basement, I overheard a phone conversation that stopped me in my tracks. Sarah was talking to someone, probably a coworker, about her living situation. It's challenging sometimes, she was saying. Mom means well, but she can be pretty demanding of attention, and she doesn't really understand that Brandon and I have our own lives, our own friends. Sometimes it feels like we're constantly entertaining a house guest who never leaves. Demanding of attention. House guest who never leaves. I stood in that basement holding one of her shirts that I'd just washed and dried and folded, processing words that cut deeper than any physical injury. I wasn't demanding attention. I was seeking basic acknowledgement of my existence. And I wasn't a permanent house guest. I was paying rent and handling household management. But more than that, her words revealed how she truly saw me, not as a mother who deserved love and respect, but as an inconvenience to be managed. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough to understand that my suspicions were correct. Sarah saw me as a burden rather than family, an obligation rather than a choice. That evening, I made a decision. I would claim my lottery winnings on Monday morning, but first, I would observe Sarah's behavior for one more weekend, giving her a final opportunity to treat me with basic human decency before I revealed how dramatically our circumstances were about to change. Friday arrived with Sarah's usual end-of-week relief and plans for Saturday activities with Brandon that predictably didn't include me. They'd decided to drive to Albany for shopping and lunch, leaving me alone for the entire day. "Will you be okay here by yourself, Mum?" Sarah asked, and her tone suggested that being okay was my only acceptable option. "Of course," I replied. "I have plenty to keep me busy." Saturday alone in the house, I spent time thinking about my future. With $200 million, I could buy a beautiful home, anywhere I wanted. I could travel, pursue interests I'd abandoned, and most importantly, I could live with dignity and respect. The lottery ticket represented more than money. It represented the freedom to demand better treatment and the financial independence to walk away from relationships that diminished me. Sunday evening, Sarah and Brandon returned from their day trip in excellent spirits, arms full of shopping bags and stories about restaurants and stores I'd never see. Their happiness was infectious, but it was also exclusive. They were a unit complete unto themselves, with no natural space for anyone else. "We saw the most beautiful furniture set at this antique store," Sarah was saying as she unpacked her purchases. "Perfect for the dining room, but way too expensive right now." Maybe next year, Brandon agreed, after we see how the promotion situation develops. They were planning a future that assumed our current arrangement would continue indefinitely, me contributing financially and domestically while remaining emotionally and socially peripheral. It was an assumption that would prove spectacularly incorrect in less than 24 hours. That night, I lay in my regular bedroom for the last time as a woman with limited options. Tomorrow, I would claim my lottery winnings. Tomorrow, everything would change. And tomorrow, Sarah would learn that treating people poorly can have consequences she never imagined. Monday morning arrived with the crisp promise of early spring and the weight of decision. I dressed carefully for my appointment with James Wilson and the Lottery Commission navy blue suit pearl earrings, and the confident bearing of someone who was about to reclaim her dignity along with a fortune. The drive to the state lottery headquarters took 45 minutes, time I spent mentally rehearsing the day ahead. Wilson met me in the parking lot, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and financial structures we'd prepared over the weekend. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Patterson?" he asked as we approached the building. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied, and meant it completely. The claiming process was surprisingly straightforward. Officials verified the ticket, confirmed the numbers, and processed paperwork, while photographers prepared for the mandatory publicity photos. I chose limited media exposure, name and town of residence would be announced, but I declined interviews or detailed personal information. Mrs. Maureen Patterson of Millbrook wins $347 million Powerball jackpot would be the extent of public information. Simple, dignified, and sufficient to change everything about my relationship with my daughter. The oversized check presentation felt surreal, like participating in someone else's life. I smiled for cameras while holding cardboard that represented more money than most people see in multiple lifetimes. The lottery officials were congratulatory and professional, handling the transfer of unimaginable wealth with business-like efficiency. Wilson arranged for immediate establishment of a revocable trust tax planning consultations and financial management services. By noon, I was officially one of the wealthiest people in New York State. By evening, the news would be public knowledge. I drove home slowly, savoring the last few hours of my old life. Everything about the familiar landscape looked different through the lens of unlimited financial freedom. The shabby apartment buildings seemed smaller. The strip malls appeared temporary, and the modest neighborhoods felt like places I was visiting, rather than spaces that defined my economic reality. At home, Sarah and Brandon were both at work, unaware that their living situation was about to change dramatically. I spent the afternoon researching real estate listings on the computer, browsing properties I could never have afforded yesterday, but could easily purchase today. Small cottages with gardens, condominiums with concierge services, even modest mansions if I wanted something grand. The cottage listings captured my imagination most strongly. Two-bedroom homes with flower gardens, updated kitchens, and the kind of peaceful independence I'd been dreaming about without realizing it. Places where I could plant roses, read books in my own sunroom, and never again feel like a burden or obligation. At 5:30, my phone began ringing. First, reporters from local news stations who'd gotten my contact information somehow. Then distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, their voices full of newfound enthusiasm for maintaining family connections. Finally, neighbors and acquaintances calling to confirm what they'd heard on the radio during afternoon drive time. By 6 o'clock, when Sarah usually returned from work, my phone had rung 18 times. I let most calls go to voicemail, but answered a few just to confirm that yes, the news reports were accurate. And no, I wasn't interested in giving interviews at this time. Sarah's car pulled into the driveway at 6:15, followed immediately by Brandon's sedan. Through the kitchen window, I watched them hurry toward the house with expressions of confusion and excitement. They'd obviously heard something during their commutes home. The front door opened with unusual urgency. Mum, Sarah called, her voice carrying a note I'd never heard before, desperate curiosity mixed with disbelief. I'm in the kitchen, I called back, continuing to prepare dinner as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. They appeared in the doorway together, both slightly out of breath, and staring at me with identical expressions of amazement. Mum, Sarah said slowly, please tell me you didn't actually win the lottery. I did win the lottery, I confirmed, stirring pasta sauce with deliberate calm. $347 million. I claimed it this morning. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in that kitchen. Sarah and Brandon stood frozen, processing information that seemed to defy everything they thought they knew about their household dynamics. When, Sarah whispered, when did you buy the ticket? When did you know? I bought it 2 weeks ago, the Tuesday after your in-laws left. I've known since that Friday. I continued cooking, allowing my words to settle into their consciousness. 2 weeks. Sarah's voice rose slightly. You've known for 2 weeks and didn't tell us. Brandon remained silent, but I could practically see him calculating what my windfall meant for their financial situation, their mortgage payments, their lifestyle possibilities. I wanted time to process the information privately, I said, finally turning to face them. It seemed important to understand how life would change before sharing the news. Sarah moved closer, her initial shock transforming into excitement. Mum, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means? We can pay off the house travel. Do anything we want. We. The assumption was immediate and absolute. This was family money, shared wealth that would improve their lives rather than specifically my life. Sarah was already planning how my lottery winnings would benefit her and Brandon. Let me make your favorite dinner to celebrate, she continued, moving toward the stove with unusual enthusiasm. This calls for something special. For the first time in months, Sarah wanted to cook for me to serve me to ensure my comfort. The transformation was so immediate and complete, it would have been amusing if it weren't so revealing of her true motivations. That's very thoughtful, I said, stepping away from the stove. But I'd like to finish cooking tonight. We need to talk about some changes. Tuesday morning brought a cascade of consequences I'd anticipated, but Sarah clearly hadn't. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, financial service offers, and long-lost acquaintances suddenly interested in reconnecting. More significantly, word had spread throughout our small town, with the efficiency that only lottery winnings can generate. Sarah woke up in a state of barely controlled excitement, immediately launching into plans for how we should handle our newfound wealth. She'd obviously spent Monday night awake, calculating possibilities and organizing her thoughts about our shared financial future. I've been thinking, she announced over breakfast, we should probably hire a financial advisor, someone who specializes in managing large amounts, and maybe we should consider getting a bigger house, something with more space for entertaining. Our wealth, our financial future, our possibilities. Every sentence reinforced her assumption that winning the lottery was a family event rather than something that had happened specifically to me. Sarah, I said gently, I need to clarify something important. This is my lottery win, my money, my decision about how to proceed. Her coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. Of course, Mum. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just thought since we're family, since we're living together, we'd make decisions together. That's exactly what we need to discuss, I replied. I've made some decisions about my future that I want to share with you. Brandon joined us in the kitchen, his usual hurried morning routine, replaced by obvious curiosity about our conversation. He poured coffee and sat down with the careful attention of someone sensing important developments. I'm buying a house, I announced. A small cottage about 30 minutes from here. I'll be moving out by the end of next week. The silence was immediate and total. Sarah stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language, while Brandon's expression shifted rapidly through surprise, concern, and what looked suspiciously like panic. Moving out, Sarah repeated. But Mum, why would you want to move out? We're happy here together. You said yourself how comfortable you've been. I took a deep breath, preparing for a conversation I'd been rehearsing mentally for days. Sarah, I need to ask you something and I'd like an honest answer. Do you remember where I slept when Brandon's family visited 2 weeks ago? Her expression became guarded immediately. You slept in the attic. It was temporary, just for a few days. I slept in a dusty, uncomfortable attic while paying $800 monthly rent because your in-laws needed the guest rooms. I kept my voice calm and factual. For 4 days, I was treated like hired help in a house where I contribute significantly to expenses and handle most domestic responsibilities. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently recognizing that this conversation was heading toward uncomfortable territory. Mum, that was different, Sarah protested. Brandon's family doesn't visit often, and we wanted them to be comfortable. You understood that it was temporary. What I understood, I said quietly, is that when it mattered, when you had to choose between my comfort and making a good impression, you chose to treat me as the least important person in this household. That's not fair. Sarah's voice carried a note of desperation. We love you. We want you here. One weekend doesn't represent our entire relationship. You're right, I agreed. One weekend doesn't represent our relationship. But it revealed something about our relationship that I needed to see clearly. I stood up from the table, moving to the counter where I could face them both directly. For 2 weeks after your in-laws left, I watched how you treated me when you thought I had nothing to offer beyond domestic service and modest financial contributions. I listened to you tell friends that I was demanding and didn't understand your independent lives. I observed you making vacation plans that didn't include me and family decisions that ignored my existence. Sarah's face flushed red. You were listening to my private conversations. I was living in a house where I apparently don't matter enough to be included in family planning or treated with basic courtesy, I replied. Sarah, winning the lottery didn't change who I am. It revealed who you are. Brandon finally spoke up, his voice careful and diplomatic. Maureen, I think maybe we've all been adjusting to living together, and sometimes adjustment periods involve misunderstandings. This isn't about adjustment, I said firmly. This is about fundamental respect. I've spent 6 months contributing financially and domestically, while being treated like a convenient arrangement rather than family. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but whether from genuine emotion or strategic manipulation, I couldn't tell. Mum, please don't make major life decisions based on one difficult weekend. We can work this out. Things can be different. You're absolutely right, I said. Things can be different. I can live in my own home where my comfort matters, where my preferences are considered, and where I'm treated like a person with inherent worth rather than someone whose value depends on financial contributions. I returned to my seat at the table facing two people whose expressions had shifted from excitement to bewilderment to something approaching panic. I've already put a deposit on a cottage with 2 bedrooms, a garden, and enough space for me to live with dignity. I'll be moving there next Monday. But what about us? Sarah asked. And the question revealed everything about her priorities. Not, what about our relationship, or how can we repair the damage, but what about us, meaning their financial security, their comfortable arrangement, their subsidized lifestyle. You're both employed adults with a beautiful home, I replied. You'll be fine without my $800 monthly contribution and unpaid domestic labor. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us, along with the unspoken recognition that Sarah was losing more than my presence. She was losing financial support and household management she'd taken for granted. "Mum," she said, her voice now carrying genuine tears. "I know we haven't been perfect, but we're family. Families work through problems together. Please don't abandon us over something we can fix." For just a moment, hearing the word abandon, I wavered. The mother in me wanted to believe that love could overcome the patterns we'd established, that good intentions could repair fundamental disrespect. But then I remembered sleeping in that attic while listening to family laughter downstairs, and I knew that some betrayals cut too deeply for easy forgiveness. "I'm not abandoning you," I said gently. "I'm choosing myself. For the first time in a very long time, I'm choosing to demand the treatment I deserve." Wednesday through Friday passed in a blur of real estate finalization, moving preparations, and increasingly desperate attempts by Sarah to change my mind. She tried guilt-reasoning promises of behavioral change, and finally anger when nothing else worked. "This is ridiculous," she declared Thursday evening. "You're throwing away our relationship over a few days of inconvenience. What would Dad think about you breaking up the family like this?" The reference to Harold was a low blow, and we both knew it, but it also crystallized something important for me. "Your father would be proud that I finally found the courage to demand respect," I replied. "He spent 40 years treating me like a partner, an equal, someone whose happiness mattered. He never would have asked me to sleep in an attic so he could impress his relatives." Friday evening, I packed the last of my belongings while Sarah made final attempts at negotiation. "What if we give you the master bedroom?" she offered. "What if I handle more of the cooking and cleaning? What if we plan family activities that include you?" "Sarah," I said, folding my favorite sweater into a suitcase, "I shouldn't have to win the lottery for you to treat me with basic human decency. The fact that you're only offering respect now, after discovering my financial situation, proves exactly why I need to leave." Monday morning arrived with moving trucks and the final severing of an arrangement that had never really worked. As I watched my belongings disappear into the truck, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that surprised me with its intensity. Sarah stood in the driveway, tears streaming down her face, making one last appeal. "Mum, please. I love you. We can fix this. Don't let money destroy our family." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of the shampoo she'd used since high school, memorizing the feeling of holding my daughter even as I prepared to let her go. "Money didn't destroy our family," I said softly. "Money revealed what our family had become. But this isn't permanent, Sarah. When you're ready to treat me like your mother instead of your tenant, when you're ready to love me for who I am, rather than what I can provide, I'll be ready to rebuild our relationship." The cottage I'd purchased was everything I'd dreamed of during those months of feeling invisible and unimportant. 2 bedrooms each with large windows overlooking a garden that was mine to design and plant. A kitchen with granite countertops and space for the cooking I enjoyed when it was chosen rather than obligated. A sunroom where I could read books and watch birds without feeling like I was taking up space in someone else's life. For the first 2 weeks in my new home, I reveled in the simple pleasure of making decisions based on my own preferences. I painted the walls colors I loved, arranged furniture for my comfort, and established routines that served my needs rather than accommodating other people's schedules. The garden became my primary project and greatest joy. I planted roses in memory of Harold herbs for cooking and vegetables for the satisfaction of growing food with my own hands. Each morning, I walked through the garden with coffee, planning the day's activities and marveling at the peace that comes with living in a space designed for your own happiness. 3 weeks after moving out, Sarah called for the first time since I'd left. "Mum," she said, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I miss you. The house feels empty without you. I miss you too, I replied, and meant it completely. I've been thinking about what you said about respect and dignity. I think maybe I didn't understand how we were making you feel. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. We talked for an hour, carefully and tentatively, two people trying to rebuild a relationship from a foundation of honesty rather than obligation. Would you like to come see the cottage? I offered. I could make lunch, show you the garden. I'd like that very much, she said. Sarah's visit the following Sunday was awkward. Initially, both of us uncertain about how to interact as independent adults rather than dependent family members. But as I gave her a tour of my home, showing her the spaces I'd created for myself, something shifted between us. It's beautiful, Mum, she said, standing in my sunroom surrounded by plants and natural light. You look happy here. Really happy. I am happy, I confirmed. For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again. We had lunch at my small dining table, conversation flowing more naturally than it had in months. Sarah asked about my daily routine, my future plans, my feelings about the dramatic changes in my circumstances. For the first time since she'd gotten married, she seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, rather than as a role in her household. I owe you an apology, she said as we cleared lunch dishes. I didn't realize how we were treating you. I thought because we loved you, because we were family, that was enough. I didn't see that love has to show up in actions, not just words. Thank you, I said simply. That means more to me than you know. Our relationship began healing slowly, carefully, like a bone that had been broken and needed time to regrow stronger. Sarah visited every few weeks, sometimes alone, sometimes with Brandon, who also apologized for his role in making me feel unwelcome in what should have been a shared home. 6 months later, when Sarah received the promotion she'd been hoping for, she called to share the news with genuine excitement rather than obligatory duty. When I decided to take a European river cruise, something I'd dreamed about for years, she helped me plan the itinerary and genuinely celebrated my adventure. We were building something new, something based on choice rather than necessity, respect rather than convenience. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before, but it was honest and sustainable in ways our previous arrangement had never been. The cottage garden flourished under my attention, producing roses that would have made Harold proud, and vegetables that supplied more fresh food than one person could consume. I shared surplus with neighbours, made friends with other gardeners at the local nursery, and discovered talents I'd forgotten I possessed. One evening, sitting in my garden with a book and a glass of wine, watching sunset, paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of contentment. The lottery ticket had provided financial freedom, certainly, but more importantly, it had given me the courage to demand something invaluable: dignity, respect, and the right to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. That dusty attic, which had felt like the lowest point of my relationship with Sarah, had actually been a gift. It had shown me clearly what my life had become, and motivated me to reclaim my worth. Sometimes the greatest revelations come disguised as our worst moments, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Sarah called as I was finishing my evening garden meditation. Hi, Mom. What are you doing? Watching the sunset from my garden, I replied. It's beautiful tonight. That sounds perfect, she said, and her voice carried warmth that felt genuine rather than obligatory. I love you, Mum. I love you too, I said, and meant it completely. The cottage garden was mine, the sunset was mine, and for the first time in years, my life was fully, authentically mine. Looking back now, 18 months after that life-changing lottery drawing, I understand that money was never really the issue. The lottery win didn't change who I was. It revealed who everyone else had always been. More importantly, it gave me the financial freedom to choose relationships based on love and respect rather than necessity and survival. My relationship with Sarah continues to evolve slowly but genuinely. We have dinner together twice a month, always at my cottage, where conversation flows naturally, and I never feel like I'm imposing on someone else's time or space. She's learned to ask about my interests, my plans, my feelings, rather than simply updating me on her life while expecting me to listen and approve. Brandon has also made efforts to repair our relationship, though progress there has been slower. He struggles with the guilt of realizing how dismissive he'd been, how easily he'd categorized me as Sarah's obligation rather than recognizing me as a person with inherent worth. But he's trying, and effort matters more than perfection. The cottage has become everything I hoped it would be: a sanctuary where my preferences matter, where my comfort is prioritized, where I make decisions based on my own happiness rather than other people's convenience. The garden produces enough vegetables to supply my kitchen and share with neighbors. The roses bloom in waves throughout the growing season, and the sunroom provides perfect space for reading and contemplation. I've also discovered interests and capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed. Piano lessons have reconnected me with music I loved as a young woman. Art classes have awakened a creative side that got buried under decades of focusing on other people's needs. Travel has expanded my world in ways I never imagined possible. The European river cruise was everything I'd dreamed of, and more. For 2 weeks, I woke up in different cities, explored museums and markets and historic sites, shared meals with fellow travelers who knew me only as Maureen, an interesting woman with stories to tell and enthusiasm for new experiences. No one saw me as someone's mother or dependent. I was simply myself, and that was enough. Financial security has allowed me to be generous in ways that bring genuine satisfaction. I've established a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to college, contributed to literacy programs at the local library, and supported community garden initiatives that help other people discover the therapeutic value of growing their own food. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned to value myself in ways that don't depend on external validation or financial circumstances. The lottery win was significant, certainly, but the real transformation came from recognizing that I deserved respect, regardless of my bank balance, that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my usefulness to others. That dusty attic taught me something invaluable. I didn't need to make myself small to fit into someone else's life. I could demand space, insist on dignity, and create a life that reflected my own values and preferences. Sarah learned something too, though it took time and honest self-reflection for her to admit it. She learned that love without respect is manipulation, that family obligations work both ways, and that taking someone for granted eventually costs more than you're prepared to pay. "I almost lost you," she said during one of our recent dinners. "Not because you moved out, but because I'd stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and feelings. I'd turned you into a role, the helpful mother, who would always be there regardless of how I treated her." "You didn't lose me," I replied. "You found me again. We both did." The money sits in carefully managed investments, generating more income than I could spend in several lifetimes. I live comfortably but not extravagantly, choosing experiences over possessions and relationships over material accumulation. The cottage is perfect for my needs. The garden provides endless satisfaction, and my life feels balanced in ways it never had before. Sometimes neighbors or acquaintances ask what it's like to be wealthy, as if money were the most interesting thing about my circumstances. But wealth isn't about the number in my bank account. It's about having choices, about being able to walk away from situations that diminish me, about demanding treatment that reflects my inherent worth as a human being. The real treasure wasn't the lottery ticket. It was the courage to use my circumstances to create a life that honored who I really was, rather than who other people needed me to be. Recently, Sarah asked if I ever regret moving out, if I ever wish I'd stayed and tried to work things out within their household. The question surprised me, because the answer was so immediately clear. Never, I told her. Leaving was the most loving thing I could do for both of us. It forced us to see each other clearly and decide whether we wanted a relationship based on choice rather than obligation. "And do we?" she asked, though her smile suggested she already knew my answer. "We do," I confirmed. "But this time it's a relationship between equals, between two adults who choose to love each other, rather than two people trapped in roles that no longer served either of us." Every morning in my garden, surrounded by flowers I planted and vegetables I grew, I remember that moment of recognition in that dusty attic. Sometimes the greatest gift is the courage to choose yourself. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do, and sometimes the most unexpected moments reveal truths that change everything. The lottery ticket cost $2 and changed my life forever, but not in the way most people imagine. It didn't make me wealthy, it made me free. And freedom, I've learned, is the most valuable prize of all. What do you think about family relationships that change when money enters the picture? Have you ever had to choose between your own dignity and keeping peace with family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button. If this story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more real-life stories about courage, family, and finding your own worth. Your support means the world to me, and I wish you all the strength to choose yourselves when the moment requires it. Remember, you deserve respect, regardless of your circumstances, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than your worth. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to plant your own garden.